Thanks for joining another episode of SBI's Growth CFO Forum, spring of 2021. My name is John Staples, partner at SBI, and please welcome my co-host, Managing Director and CFO Forum Lead, Jim Edamana. Jim, how are you doing today?
Hey, John, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. I'm really excited about talking about this topic today. First off, let's talk about what we have planned for today. We're going to briefly just talk about our guest speaker, Brian Day, CEO of Fuse, who talked about his ascension from CFO to CEO. Then we'll talk a little bit about the driving efficacy and efficiency through digital and virtual selling. I'm pretty excited about talking about that topic. And then our final topic is driving accountability through visibility. And I know, Jim, that you're super passionate about that, so I'm sure the audience is looking forward to hearing from you on that. So before we jump into it, Jim, could you tell us a little bit about why a CFO growth forum and why now?
Yeah, I mean, in our work, of course, we see lots of different leaders of different corporations, private equity backed companies, public backed companies. And as we look across the C-suite, we came away with the insight that there are a number of CFOs who are growth drivers. It's that old stereotype of the bean counter with a green eye shade. And while that probably exists somewhere out there in industry, at least in our work, we see a lot of CFOs that are strategic. They think about the big picture. They think about the here and now also. They work with the chief revenue officers, the heads of product, the heads of operations, the CEOs. So, think about our clients that we serve. We see a lot of CFOs that are out there driving it as a key member of the team that's doing this. So, of course, we thought it would be good to help arm and enable these folks so that they can go in with their teams and bring a set of insights, a set of best practices, and help their companies grow.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. So I know Brian was one of those growth-focused CFOs, and he shared some of his takeaways from his ascension from CFO into CEO, which we see, across the board, quite a few CFOs that are, trying to drive themselves into the seat of the CEO. Was there anything specific around Brian's discussion that maybe one or two points that you thought were relevant for the audience today to really understand?
Yeah, I think, a few of the notes that I wrote down were really about understanding customers, understanding value prop. I mean, Brian by training is an attorney. So he talked through his career path of going in, learning finance, but then using his role in finance to get out into the market, to go engage with customers, understand in the companies that he worked with and for how they help their customers to grow. And, we listened to Brian's story that allowed him to go up the chain within finance, and then hop over into the CEO role. And so I think, the key takeaway I had is around not just being focused on the numbers, but being focused on what actually drives the numbers. And we'll come back on this when we talk about metrics, but there's a difference between output metrics, financial metrics, and then the input metrics and what actually leads to that. And Brian spent some time talking about how one needs to understand the actual business drivers to get the outputs, the EBITDA, the free cash flows, et cetera.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I was most excited about is, we had 13 participants with a target of around 10 at the end of the day, and we actually had to turn some folks away because it started to get a little bit, too many folks on the phone, on the discussion makes it a little bit crazy. Not everybody gets to participate. So I know that we're going to talk about at the end of our call a little bit about what people should expect next regarding the CFO growth forum. So we'll end with that, Jim. But let's just jump into the topic, which was around driving efficacy and efficiency through digital and virtual selling. I know Brian touched on that, but we had a lot of lively discussion around that. Perhaps maybe 3 to 5 takeaways from your view that would be most relevant for the audience around that topic.
Yeah, look, and I think just in the introduction of that topic, right, you gave the words efficacy and efficiency. And I think when a lot of people think about CFOs, they're thinking about efficiency. How can I squeeze more out with less, right? Like, how can I get more results with fewer resources? And what I'd say is growth CFOs want to do that, but their mind first goes to efficacy. how do I achieve the number? How do I make my number? How do I grow? And then how do I do that as efficiently as possible? And so I think that was the mindset with which people came into this discussion. The other big thing, we're sitting here recording this in April of 2021, right? So COVID, knock on wood, is winding down. We're getting, world's going to get back to normal. But the big part of the discussion with the CFO group was, this is a great big experiment, right? Everyone could see virtual selling on the horizon, right? We've seen this coming for years, but this drove us to actually doing it. So the participants on the call shared a number of best practices, a number of insights for how virtual selling is affecting their businesses, right? Hey, in the old world, we might have talked to 10 customers in a day. Now a rep can talk to 15 to 20, right? We might have had teams in market, field-based teams, expensive in high-cost countries. Now we're experimenting with having, say, inside sales in Poland calling into Germany or the UK, inside sales in Mexico City calling into the US, for example. So there are some benefits there, some things around virtual selling, but then given where things are in terms of digital selling, digital sales, using some of the newer technologies, enabling all of that, there were some great anecdotes, or let's say front-running case studies around how companies are using digital, getting more out of their sales team. I drop $1 in, I get $3 back. That kind of a repeatable metric, that kind of repeatable performance that is now we've been forced to live with and adapt and innovate with over the past year. So there's a lot of excitement coming out, I think, around that.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of my takeaways, and I'd love to get your feedback on it, because I think it's relative for the audience. But we talked quite a bit around customer acquisition cost, and the CFO is trying to drive that acquisition cost down. We talked, you just mentioned it, around increased rep selling time based on the fact that I'm no longer traveling during COVID. But as I come out of this, and those customers that we saw, or clients that we saw that were really getting ready for this, were improving their digital selling motion. They were improving their inside sales motion. They were implementing better e-commerce approaches across the board, all in an effort to drive down customer acquisition costs and get a higher yield out of their sales team. Was there anything specific around acquisition cost and improved productivity that you thought the audience should hear from the discussion, Tim?
Yeah, good question. I think we did hear some of that. Obviously, everybody's looking to use the various tools, techniques that are coming out to connect with more potential customers. And I think there's a lot of good track record, a lot of good case examples we could talk through about how companies are doing that. There's always this us versus them, right? You get that with sales and operations, you get that with sales and marketing. That's one of the reasons why when we touch on metrics, that's so important to be able to track through. Hey, we generated some marketing generated leads, they were qualified, we worked them through the funnel, that stuff flowed through together. But yeah, we heard some good stories around how that's being done. I think that the other key point, this is a different topic, John, but the point around customer retention, using customer success. So customer acquisition cost is significant, but then you have to be able to monetize that customer over a long period. And I think we heard some interesting things around how people are really driving customer success to retain customers. And that, of course, increases the lifetime value of that customer, even while we're trying to drive down customer acquisition costs, we're driving up the long-term payoff of that customer.
Yeah, I think that might be my biggest takeaway from that first section, Jim, was really, trying to drive increased productivity across the sales force during the situation that we went through with COVID. And let's knock on wood that we're coming out of that, but improving the productivity across the board because we're not traveling and we're able to make more sales calls. We need to have better alignment with marketing because marketing's not running events, or they weren't running events at that time. And then trying to better align those two groups in order to get a better yield from our spend across sales and marketing. So great insights. I know our audience will enjoy hearing more about that. And then why don't we, for this time, we'll pivot into our second topic here, which will be around driving accountability through visibility leveraging the right dashboards, metrics, and internal and external benchmarks in order to make the number at the end of the day. I know you've got a lot of passion
That's a
around this.
mouthful.
The what?
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a mouthful. So I know that this is a passion of yours. So maybe the same question, 3 to 5 takeaways that our audience would get value from around this topic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, metrics sounds kind of boring, right? It's like, hey, we're sitting here in 2021, what's that exciting about metrics? But it's one of those things where just fundamentally, when you think about the role of a CFO, when you think about, we go into clients a lot, we hear people talk about accountability. Our take, you and I have talked about this, you can't drive accountability if you have no scorecard, no scoreboard, right? It's, if you or I walk in and say, hey, John, you're not making your calls, you're not a high performing salesperson, that's us making a judgment. If you have a scoreboard, if you have the right metrics or the right standards and benchmarks to be able to say, hey, John, in order for you to make your number, you need to make 60 calls per week. Hey, John, you made 40. What's going on? Are your children sick? Or maybe you're tied up with a different deal or something. But the fact that you have that scorecard, you have the standard, but then you have a benchmark to say, John, if you look across at your peers, Tony, who's crushing his number, is making 70 calls. So, hey, here's a benchmark for how this person is doing his or her job and how it flows down to you. So that sounds really simple, but we see this all the time where companies, kind of gloss over it. Like, yes, we should have metrics, we should have the scoreboards, we should have the, dashboards, etc. Not everyone does it. And I think one of the key points that came up on this call is people get really wrapped up around the output metrics. Did I hit my EBITDA? Did I hit my revenue, etc.? But as you and I know, those are outputs. So in order to drive the right kind of behaviors, because all this comes down to behavior change. All this comes down, making the number comes down to having your commercial team execute the right behaviors. That's where you get the input metrics. Did you make your outbound emails? Did you follow up on the marketing generated leads? Did you do your prospecting? And not just did you do it, but how much of it did you do? Did you return calls quickly? So having the right set of input metrics and the scoreboards around that and benchmarks, etc., is so critical, right? I mean, it sounds basic, but it's sometimes you can gloss over the basic stuff and miss a lot of value and impact.
Yeah, I mean, let's maybe talk briefly about that one. I know that during the past 12 to call it 18 months here that we've been dealing with the situation here, you hear things like, retention is the new growth lever. And we talked a little bit about this with the CFO forum around, how do we get better at cross-sell? How do we get better at upsell? Because everybody across the board was down on new logo acquisition over the last 12 or so months. So I think the market has said, new logos were down 27% across the board. So if you still have to make the number, which we all do, where does it come from? And it came from cross-selling and upselling within the base customers that you have. So number one, retention being critical. And you mentioned customer success, Jim. So maybe expand a little bit around metrics for retention, churn reduction, increased wallet share, etc. Some of the ones that we're all trying to measure, we're all trying to improve, but the CFOs were super passionate about that. So maybe share a couple of nuggets on that.
Yeah, no, great point. And I think some of the takeaways I had from this conversation and just the work we do in general, customer success, customer retention starts before the deal is closed, right? So it's understanding what the customer, what are the critical business issues that the customer is trying to solve for, and then making sure that, hey, we onboard the customers the right way, get them ramped up the right way, and then we are fulfilling the promise, the value prop promise that we sold. And so with that as the upfront piece, getting the metrics right. And we heard about this a lot around, there are early warning, indicators, right? So if you have the metrics right, you'll see in a business that has ongoing revenue, did the customer, are they buying the consumables? Are they buying the ongoing maintenance? Things like this. There are ways to tune your metrics to see, are they using it? Is the customer actually using the software or the product? And there's ways to get some early indicators. Then you get things like, if this behavior is observed or this output is observed, then what? Do we have the customer service rep engage with them? Do we have the sales rep? So you got an indicator, and then you got an action that comes out of it. And then did we do the right follow-up? So we've heard some great, examples of companies that have gotten this stuff wired together where they're able to see the indicators, take the action, and then drive the right kind of outcomes. And by the way, all this gets back into process too. So we see this with a lot of our clients. It's getting the right process in place to underlie this. The metrics by themselves aren't going to matter, but you have to be able to smooth the process out to drive the right kind of discipline and action to then get the results.
Yep. My big takeaway from that section was around, propensity to churn. Those folks on the phone that were doing a terrific job of getting ahead of it, reducing churn overall, and increasing cross-sell, upsell with those that had a predictable model around propensity to churn so they could get ahead of that. So fantastic, and thank you, Jim, for that. For right now, why don't we talk about what the folks on the call we're looking forward to talking to on the next CFO forum, Jim? Were there 3 or 4 topics that they shared with you that we're going to be talking about in future CFO roundtables?
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Right. So again, keep in mind, this is not a one-time event, right? We've created this growth CFO forum as a way to have an ongoing, relationship and enable a bunch of growth leaders. And so on future roundtables, there's a set of topics that could include things like M&A, about how do we integrate new acquisitions, how do we make the proverbial 1 + 1 equals, at least 2.5, if not 3. So how do we do both the diligence and integrate the acquired companies in? I think one of the most impactful topics is going to be around compensation. So this is one of those ones where CFOs, is kind of the fox in the hen house, right? So the CFO, as the person who's overall in charge of C&Bs, thinking about how do I get the most. If I put $1 in for sales and marketing cost and benefit, do I get $2 out? Do I get $3 out? How do I architect that stuff the right way? So I think that's definitely going to be a topic that we get into for our next time. And then we may get something around, operational planning and how do we dial in the organization. So, when we do our next one, we'll be coming up on operating planning season. And so I think that's one where everybody wants to know, all right, great, I've got my strategic plan. How do I bring that down to an annual operating plan? And then what does that imply then for the sales team, for territory allocations, for quotas, things like that? So that's, those are probably the 3 topics we'll cover on our next growth CFO roundtable.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the, how do you handle 2020 as you think about annual planning, I think will be a big topic. So listen, Jim, thanks so much for sharing your insights from the CFO Growth Forum. I know I enjoyed the time with all the folks, and I know they did as well. If you'd like to learn more about the CFO Forum, visit salesbenchmarkindex.com. Look for the executive programs link in the website menu, or contact Melissa Valdez, director of our executive programs. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Jim, for all that insight. And we'll see you next time on the CFO Growth Forum discussion.